Hello, and welcome to this latest episode in our Path to High Performance podcast series. In this episode, we're joined by our colleague and business psychologist, Sukhwant Bal, who over the past 20 years or so has been advising, developing, and working with leadership teams across a range of businesses. Together, we look at how remote working has impacted employee engagement and the challenges that many employers will now face as they move towards embracing this new part home-based, part office-based hybrid model. If you'd like to discuss any of the topics that are raised in today's podcast in more detail, or if you'd like to know more about our talent development programmes or executive search services, then please do visit us at www.aimsinternational.com/UK for the UK team, or www.aimsinternational.com/IE if you'd like to speak to the team in Ireland. And lastly, if there are any recruitment or talent development related topics that you'd like us to discuss in future podcasts, then please do reach out and drop either myself or Ken an email. We'd love to hear from you, and we hope you enjoy this new episode.
In terms of this always on culture, particularly working from home, how do you recommend people deal with that in terms of being always available and trying to prevent burnout?
Yeah. And I think the reality is that's how a lot of people are feeling right now, that they just feel overwhelmed, that there's just this always sense of I've got to be available. And you then slip into waking up first thing in the morning, and what you do is you end up checking your emails. Last thing before you go to bed, the last thing you do is you want to clear your emails. And then clearly and even if you're not physically working, you're still thinking about work. And there's always this cloud hanging over individuals' head around some weight on their shoulders or pressure on their shoulders, that if I'm not available and if I'm not instantly responding to emails, somehow I'm not being a committed employee. Somehow somebody's going to think less of me. Somehow somebody's going to have a conversation with me about, having a quiet word with me about how come you didn't respond to that email over the weekend. And that almost then becomes the precedence. So I think the first thing is, I think it is worth having these conversations around. So I've seen some organizations actually sort of start running workshops on resilience and mental well-being. But I'm still, though, asking the question, are we getting to the root cause of the issue? Are we genuinely? I'm not saying having a workshop on resilience is a bad thing, but all I'm saying is that resilience is one part of it. But are we genuinely, as a team, as a function, or as an organization, having a conversation about what is okay behavior and what isn't okay behavior? And to what extent, as leaders and managers, are we actually role modeling the right behaviors? So is it acceptable, for example, for me to be emailing as a line manager at 9 o'clock at night, but telling my team, actually, you need to be looking after your mental well-being, and you ought to learn to switch off. You've got to be leading. So I guess what I'm saying is words are cheap, and what you practice and what you role model counts has far more weight than actually having protocols and workshops on resilience if the root cause of the issue isn't being handled.
Yeah.
So Ken, that's one part of it. It's about having a candid conversation as a team and as an organization about to what extent are people feeling overwhelmed. And then the second part of it is, I think, giving individuals, employees, some basic life skills around how to manage work rather than work managing you. So just to give some practical tips then about how to manage work rather than work managing you. So one is that each individual should be clear about what is a reasonable working day, and actually committing to having a start time and an end time to a working day. Otherwise, the maxim that work expands to fill the time available kicks in. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think individuals should be putting in their calendar the events that give them some energy, the events that make them laugh, the events that somehow help them feel replenished. So whether that's doing my yoga class, whether that's having drinks with a friend, whether that's taking my dog out for a walk, whether that's going for playing with the children, I'm saying that you actually need to diarize those events. Because if you don't diarize them, someone else or something else will steal that time.
Yes. Yeah, we've all lost sort of mental downtime in our days. You know, we no longer have, you know, when you are remote working, you don't have the commute in where you have, you know, time to process and contemplate what's coming, and you don't have the commuting time on the way back either.
Good point.
You don't have the walks to the coffee machine, which is basically a sort of mental time out, isn't it? To sort of refresh between tasks. And so, you know, there is this you know, Zoom fatigue is real, and I think you know that it's sort of the back-to-back Zoom calls are exhausting for people. And I think you're right, Sukhwant. I mean, you have to build that time in for yourself, because it's very easily eaten up, and it's example led, isn't it? Because I think that you will follow the example of your line manager and take that as what's expected from yourself.
Exactly. Exactly. Example led, and also taking personal accountability that there are things that I can do. It's not a hopeless situation. There are small tactics and strategies that you can do, and not least to actually build islands in your day where you could actually focus uninterrupted on an important piece of work. And we know from some recent research that the more you feel you are making progress on a big ticket priority, the more it impacts your sense of self-esteem, well-being, and progress. And so I think that's another important thing for individuals to start considering is unless I manage my calendar and manage my diary, somebody else will steal my time. And the extent to which you can actually create 60-minute or 90-minute islands in your day for focusing on important work, and also perhaps even putting time in your calendar in between meetings, so you've got a time to reflect on what are my actions, what are my commitments, and avoiding the whole idea of moving from back-to-back meetings where your day just becomes a blur by the time you get to the end of the day.
Some companies are even starting to recognize this. LinkedIn back in April gave all of their employees a paid week off to prevent burnout. You know, that got a lot of publicity. There's been some legislation around the right to disconnect. Some other companies have been setting guidelines in terms of sending emails out of hours. So I do think some companies have woken up to this and the impact that it can have on people. And I think you touched on some there in relation to travel time, that some people are now using the travel time as extra working hours.
Absolutely.
Which is also contributing to burnout. And these might have been people who are traveling excessive durations of travel time in gridlock. So I think it's important that people do watch out for their own mental health and try and prevent that burnout as well.
And I think even more relevant, if you think that ultimately we are shifting to a knowledge economy and a creative economy, where running on empty actually diminishes your performance and your productivity and your creativity. So ultimately, I think we need to get away from this notion that what matters is putting in the hours. What really matters is actually delivering creative, innovative, game-changing work that makes a difference. And in order for you to do that, you have to be at the top of your game. And in order to be at the top of your game, you can't be fatigued. You can't be feeling a sense of overwhelm. You know, working out of anxiety and working out of fear that I may just lose my job is often some of the behaviors, some of the underlying reasons driving people to work unreasonable hours. So I think one of the things that we can do is help individuals get to the root cause of what is driving your behavior. Is it a sense of insecurity that if I'm not seen as being pulling my weight, that the risk is that I won't have a role? Or is it my sense of being a perfectionist? I've got to get everything right. And if I'm going to get everything right and the quality and the standards have to be right, it takes long hours. fundamentally, what is driving your need to work silly hours? And
Mhm.
unless you get to the root cause of that, everything else seems to be putting a sticky plaster on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, does that sort of, in terms of understanding that individual, mindset in terms of what's driving those working hours, presumably that plays a central role in the work you do through your one-to-one coaching, but also through your team development programs as well, in terms of what you do. Because I'm just interested from a team perspective, because obviously you're right in terms of saying that we have to, diarize and put time into, to take time out, but also to commit to work that's going to give us that fulfillment, and it's not just the churn of emails all the time. But sometimes that, if you're not lucky enough to work within an organization who has been progressive enough to build that time in for you, that results in you having to push back potentially on what's being expected of you. So how would you, through your team, would that form part of your team development workshops that you do, in terms of understanding that relationship between line manager and employee, and how to have those constructive conversations and push back when you need to?
Indeed. And I think that's a really valid point, actually, that unless people actually put their hand up and say, this is now unreasonable, this is now sort of way beyond normal in terms of the hours that I'm working, unless people put their hand up, that then just becomes the new normal. That just becomes the default way of working, because everybody else thinks, well, nobody else is raising it. Maybe it's just me. And one of the things that I found on our team development programs is the minute you start asking individuals, just share what your experience has been working during COVID, what's been some of the lowlights and what have been some of the highlights. The minute individuals start talking about the challenges they've been facing, other people's eyes light up and say, oh my goodness, I'm so glad you mentioned that. I've now realized I'm not alone. And you think, well, why did it take that formal team development meeting for people to have this honest conversation with each other, that actually I too was struggling. I too felt that way, but I didn't feel comfortable raising it in the meetings. I didn't feel comfortable reaching out to you. I wasn't comfortable asking for your help. Why? And I think that's a really important part of any team development program, which is, do we have enough trust with each other where we can be transparent with each other without feeling that somebody's going to judge us? And do we have enough goodwill in this team where if somebody were to say, I just don't think I can meet that time commitment, I don't think I can meet that project deadline, are we actually going to genuinely think any less of that individual because of their track record and everything else that they've achieved in the past? So to what extent are we able to have honest conversations, talk about the things that are really on our mind, ways in which we can support each other, and the ways in which we can actually perhaps even start coaching each other as a way of navigating some of these challenges?
Yeah, and we've just come full circle back to culture again, haven't we?
Indeed.
Yeah,
that's true.
So looking forward now, when we all start going back to the office, we enter this hybrid way of working. What would it's going to be difficult, isn't it? I mean, clearly for employees, there is potentially that the advantage of being able to have a better work-life balance, potentially if they're able to implement some of the things we've just been talking about. But from an organizational perspective, in terms of that culture that we were just talking about, what are going to be the key challenges, do you think, for organizations shifting to this hybrid model now? And what do you think that they should be, sort of some of the key implementations that they should be thinking about to facilitate this ease into the hybrid working?
So I think the door has now been widely open now on this whole topic of mental well-being, spiritual well-being, stress, burnout, the psychological dimensions that lie behind how do you create a positive culture, and what's the difference in a toxic culture. I mean, I think that door now is widely open. And I think I think there is no going back now in terms of the ways that we used to work before, because now people have had this taste of, I can actually be more self-managed. I have more autonomy working from home. That what I need from a line manager is not to keep checking in on me and micromanaging me. What I need from a line manager is somebody who watches out for me, somebody who has my back, somebody who's willing to develop me, nurture me, encourage me, give me some support, give me some encouragement. So I think that's probably the one big shift, which is what is it that employees actually want from their line managers is very different. And line managers too have to accept that their role now, it can't be a push approach. It has to be more of a pull approach. And the pull approach is adopting more of a coaching approach. And it's so I love this sort of the maxim, you know, that and I think it was Maya Angelou, the poet, who said, "People forget what you say, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you make them feel." And ultimately, how have people felt during the COVID situation? And I think you could say, well, there's been a myriad of feelings that people have had, but often those feelings have been one of anxiety and overwhelm and stress. And so, to what extent did my line manager help me during those difficult, challenging times? And ultimately, that's what gets remembered. So I think the more we can develop line managers to build their capabilities in emotional intelligence and in empathy and in listening and in actually coaching, that will count far more than some of the what I would call the perks that often get talked about, like bean bags and nice coffees and massages, and because those are extrinsic factors. Well, whereas what really matters are the intrinsic factors, and the intrinsic factors live long in the memory. So just to give you an example, I have a daughter sort of in her late 20s working with an accountancy firm. And during lockdown, the business actually sent everybody out a parcel and a package, in terms of some wine, some crisps, and some food, and a little hamper with a view to let's have a social Friday together. And at the time, I can remember just the delight of opening that package. But ultimately, what she remembers though is the lack of support that she had from a line manager.
Yeah.
That's ultimately what she's remembered. So I think it is important to factor in that ultimately what people will want when they get back into the new environment, into a hybrid environment, is a lot more compelling, powerful, rich conversations. And line managers are often fearful of, well, I don't feel qualified to have those conversations. And I've often heard line managers say, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know how to have these conversations. But if you can work on the basis, actually, your role is not to fix people. That's not your role as a manager. Your role is simply to be a brilliant listener. And by asking great questions and by adopting a coaching approach, you can help people figure things out for themselves. And that's the power of a pull approach rather than a push approach. And I think in the new environment, in the new world, I think that's going to have to be the default setting about looking after people, having great coaching conversations, and actually equipping both line managers and with employees with the fundamental life skills of how do you manage work rather than work managing you.
Yes. So it's rapid change, isn't it? Especially for those line managers who don't feel that, they feel that maybe they haven't quite upskilled themselves in terms of that people management side, and they found themselves in that position. There's been a lot of change over the last 12 months, and it will continue.
Sukhwant, just one last question from me in relation to hybrid working. And I've listened to some clients tell me about their experiences of when this was unintentionally the case. Last year when they were in the office and some people were dialing in on Zoom or Teams, and they said it didn't work. They felt, there was conversations happening in the meeting room, and then other people were on Zoom, and that camaraderie and those informal conversations that were taking place didn't work. Have you any thoughts on this in terms of how companies can manage this hybrid approach going forward?
So one of the challenges, I think, is if you are raising these important questions in an open forum, the view often is, I've got to say the right thing because my line manager's on this call, and I don't want to seem to be complaining. I don't want to seem to be moaning. So people tell you what they think you want to hear. So I think definitely there is some setup of these Zoom calls. If we are genuinely trying to be open and honest, it actually often starts with the line manager sharing their own experiences of how they struggled, some of the things that they still not got right, some of the dilemmas that they're wrestling with. That the more the line manager can set the tone for the team, the more the team are likely to reciprocate. So that's the first thing. It can't be, look, as a line manager, look, I'm in control of everything. It's going swimmingly for me. I'm still getting the results and the outputs required. But how about the rest of you? What are you struggling with? I mean, that just won't wash. So there is something here. I mean, whether you call it vulnerability, whether you call it disclosure, whether you call it transparency, whether you call it openness, that's an important part, I think, of a line manager, is to say, look, I have really wrestled with this. I'm still not through the woods, but I just want to share it with you. Does anybody else feel the same way? That then gives license for other people to say, do you know what? Me too. Count me in. I felt the same way. So that's one part of how you can actually make those Zoom meetings more effective. I think the second thing is that I think it is difficult for a line manager to handle and manage. So, if I've got a team of 8, 9, 10 people on a Zoom call, it is very difficult to keep track of who is saying what, and actually showing empathy, asking the right questions. So I think a more viable approach then is actually to invite people into breakout rooms and perhaps even pair people up in breakout rooms. And you actually ask individuals, could you act as a coaching pair for each other? And I don't necessarily need to know what you talked about, but maybe you could share at the end of that coaching conversation 1 or 2 actions that we could share as a group or as a team around collectively, how do we now emerge from these strange and difficult times stronger and wiser? And then the final element to it then, Ken, is I think the importance of not just doing it as a one-off activity, but actually because the first meeting will always be awkward and challenging and difficult. And if that's the only reference point and that's the only time you have it, it's almost sort of such an awkward meeting that people are glad to be off the call. But if you can actually keep this as a regular dialogue, whether it's on a monthly basis, where you just say to the team, we're not going to talk about anything other than how are you? What's going on in your world? What small thing are you struggling with? What small thing could you be celebrating? And actually having forums where individuals can be open, authentic, honest, transparent, then for me that starts setting the culture of that team and that particular function.
Okay.
I think the theme of transparency is really interesting, and I think it's really key in relation to this remote working and also the hybrid model, because actually it does present a great opportunity for increased transparency. I mean, we invite all our colleagues into our homes every day for a start.
Exactly.
Within Zoom meetings, and I think clients that I've seen that have really maximized this opportunity, they have done that through jumping on that transparency opportunity from a top-down side as well. So the leadership team has been able to connect and be more transparent with their workforce, and it's been key for keeping the communication live, but they've also seen it as an opportunity to be more transparent with the workforce. So I think transparency is key to keeping that employee engagement and that and the general culture alive.
Absolutely, and just to build on that, I think we live in a world now where your status, your position, your hierarchy counts for very little, actually. So people don't respect your job title. What they respect is you as a human being. So are you somebody? So from a leadership point of view, gone are the days when people will do things because they see you as being a head honcho, with a big job title. And what they're really looking for is, why should I be led by you?
Yeah.
And what am I seeing in your ways of working, your behavior, the way in which you are actually showing up, that demonstrates that you are somebody who is worth following?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, but I'm sure we'll pick up a lot of these themes in future episodes. But thank you to you both today. And Ken and I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Ken. Pleasure.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Sukhwant.
Many thanks for listening to this latest episode in our Path to High Performance podcast series. AIMS International UK and AIMS International Ireland are part of AIMS International, a global executive search and talent management organisation, supporting our clients to both find and grow leaders and high performance talent. If you'd like to learn more about our services, then please go to www.aimsinternational.com/UK for the UK team, or www.aimsinternational.com/IE for the team in Ireland.